My Left Hand is Trying to Kill Me by xXKikitoXx. When I was 17, I was involved in a car accident. I was driving home from a friend's house after studying for a few hours. It was dark, the weather conditions weren't that great, and I was admittedly still kind of buzzed. I was stupid, I know, but hey, I was a hormonally charged teenage boy getting a bit drunk with a really hot girl. Can you blame me? Don't answer that. Anyway, I lived a little ways out of town, and taking the back roads home meant that I was driving along the side of a state park. As I came around a heavily forested bend in the road, I thought I saw a tall, shambling creature step into the road from the left side. So, with all my good judgment, natural evasive talent, and a whole 2 weeks' worth of expertise in driving by myself, I jerked the steering wheel to the right and became very closely acquainted with a large tree. To cut a long story short, the tree wasn't as friendly up close as it had seemed from a distance, and I was in the hospital for a month. When I was finally discharged, it was not without several casts and some minor brain damage. Unfortunately for me, the months of rehabilitation it took for me to be able to walk and function again were plagued by seizures. Small ones at first. Sometimes I'd throw my cereal around the room for fun rather than bringing it to my mouth, or tick my head to the side because my brain decided it liked viewing the world that way. But gradually, the seizures got worse. They went from myoclonic jerks to full-blown grand mal seizures. The first big one happened when I was in the park with my rehab nurse. She was trying to coach me on how to put one leg in front of the other, when I apparently suddenly became stiff, collapsed to the ground, and started shaking violently. It's not as thrilling as it sounds. Though I don't remember the incident myself, I do remember coming back to and having grass stuck to me by the drool that was all over my shirt. It was pretty gross. I was given medications to try and attempt to reduce the frequency and the severity of my episodes. But when they continued to happen countless times over the next few months, regardless, it was time to explore other options. When my doctors first mentioned a corpus callosetomy, I think I nearly fainted. I absolutely did not want anyone in my brain or any part of it removed. The few brain cells that I had left were precious to me, and I thought that if they took some more away, the others would get lonely. But with a little more information and another bad seizure, I ended up agreeing to the surgery when I was 19. The recovery time was shorter than I had expected, and though I was warned of a whole range of potential side effects that might occur, I really didn't experience too many. And the ones that I did experience were fairly bearable. Of course, my friends all loved to exploit my now split brain. It wasn't a party until someone had covered one of my eyes or the other to show me images or hand me objects to see what I would say or do in reaction to them. The seizures also did happen significantly less. Dare I say, they almost stopped altogether. The strange things began to happen when I was 25. I was driving back home to visit my parents, sober this time, and I took the old back roads for the sake of nostalgia, though also to prove to myself that I could do it, part of moving past old injuries and such, when, without warning, my left hand jerks the wheel away to the right. I managed to brake in time and regain control of my vehicle, but I sat there in shock for a few moments wondering what had just happened. I drove the rest of the way at a snail's pace. From that moment on, it's like my left hand was possessed or something. If I was trying to comb my hair, my right hand would pick up the comb only to have my left hand snatch it and throw it across the room. If I was riding a bicycle and waved to a neighbor with righty, the left will pull the handlebars at a random direction, like it's avoiding something for no apparent reason. I started becoming scared of my left hand when my fiancée Jess was chopping up the vegetables for our dinner, and it decided to wrestle her for the knife. It took several minutes to pry my left hand off her. It left decent bruising on her wrist, and then slapped her hard across the face once we'd gotten her free. I'd never felt so ashamed in my life. It's been a few months now since it started acting up. I've been to see my specialist. He told me that it's rare, but sometimes miscommunications like this happen. He suggested that maybe I had seen something in my left field of vision and that my hand was reacting to it without being able to communicate why to the other side of my brain. I feel like I need couples therapy for the two brains in my head. Since speaking to my doctor, things have started to get, well, a little creepy. I don't want to say that I'm scared of the possibility that my left hand knows something I don't, but I'm getting nervous. A few weeks back, I was home by myself, just hanging out. Jess was on her way home and I heard the car pull into the driveway. Now, the way my house is set up is so that you can be in the kitchen facing the sink, which is where I was at the time. And to your left, you can look out the window to see the garden that a car pulling into would illuminate for you. I didn't bother looking because I was fairly certain it was Jess. But my left hand immediately went crazy, throwing objects at the window. I looked over to see nothing. But when Jess came inside, she looked spooked. She whispered to me uncertainly that when she'd pulled in, her headlight shone over the garden, she thought that she'd seen something shambling through it. She described it as a tall, sort of thing that scrabbled along like an injured animal or an old lady, but it was moving too fast for either of those. It didn't look like a person or like an animal. It was stuck together looking, like someone was dressed up in animal bones and skins. She also said that she barely even saw it, so she could be wrong. But she thought that it was standing and staring in the window before she'd interrupted it. There have been many other small instances like that since then, but last night was the most terrifying to me. In fact, it's why I'm writing all of this. I just wanted someone outside of my family to know in case anything happens. Jess and I were both sound asleep when suddenly my left arm starts flailing around. It's wildly slamming the mattress, knocking over whatever is in reach, and causing a huge ruckus, waking us both up. We scrabbled for the lights, and when we got them on, our bed sheets were entirely pulled off us. There's no way my left hand could have done that on its own. The bed is a king-sized bed. It's way too big to even reach the other side to untuck everything normally, let alone my hand doing it solo while we slept. In addition to that, our bedroom door was open. We always sleep with it shut. Always, without exception. And there were wet footprints on the carpet. They didn't look entirely human to me, but I couldn't tell you what they were. So, maybe my left hand isn't trying to kill me, but I'm now convinced that something else is. The Corner of My Eye by Belgium Art. He's one of my earliest memories. I call him the man in the corner of my eye. I don't know who he is or what he wants. The night I first saw him, I was about 5 or 6 years old. The memory starts with my dad. In those days, he was in bad shape. He drank every night and smoked weed continuously. This had resulted in varying weird situations where he simply lost his mind. This night was one of them, as he frantically pulled me out of my bed and put me in the car before my sleepy self had even noticed what was going on. I don't know exactly how long we drove for, but after a while we arrive and he pulls me into this decrepit-looking house. The man greeted us inside, and after my dad handed him some money, he picked me up and dragged me inside. I remember screaming for my dad to save me, as he kept saying that it was for my own good. The stranger put me in the center of a room where all the windows had been covered with newspapers and told me to stay put as he closed the door, turning the room pitch black. He started to chant softly and I started to cry, not having any idea of what was going on. The room was pitch black, but I could swear that I saw shapes moving all around me. For about an hour I was in that room. As I laid terrified in the center of that room, I don't recall most things that happened clearly, but I remember the end. My mother barging in, picking me up from the floor, and running outside as the man yelled at her saying that he wasn't finished yet. My mother told me at an older age that my father was convinced that an evil spirit or demon had possessed me and that I was in dire need of an exorcism. Maybe my father wasn't crazy and my mother ruined the exorcism by interrupting it. Perhaps the man is a result of the failed exorcism itself. I honestly have no idea. My mom brought me to my grandparents' house where I would be safe for the night. That night I woke up to a sudden realization that someone was standing over my bed, a tall, lanky man. The room was too dark to see details, but I knew he was looking at me. He slowly moved his arm through the dark. It was too long and out of proportion with the rest of his body. My younger self was so afraid that I couldn't scream or move as he made a gesture that I needed to be quiet. The man slowly walked away from my bed and dissipated into the corner of my vision. I didn't sleep that night. Ever since that dreadful night, I have encountered him throughout many parts of my life. Never as clearly and always in small glimpses. Sometimes it's just noises or doors that are suddenly open, when I know for sure that I'm all alone in the house. At first, it was hard to notice. I would be walking around my house, I would enter a room only to notice him standing in the hallway at the last moment. But when I looked into the hallway properly, he would be gone. I would inspect a door that wasn't opened before and see a glimpse of him right behind the closed door. I would look up the staircase and see his head disappear over the railing. I'd catch a glimpse of him moving around the corner as I turned around the shower to grab soap or shampoo. He seems to be coming closer with every appearance, however. The more depressed, afraid, and alone I am, the stronger, more frequent, and closer he seems to get. He doesn't seem to appear when others can see him, though, making him the biggest reason that I'm afraid to live by myself. I don't know what he wants. I don't know what he is, and I don't know where he came from. The events are seemingly at random, and it's currently been over 1.5 years since I last sighted him. But I know he's not gone. No, he's just hiding in the corner of my eye. Don't ride your bike through the cemetery. The dead don't like it. Written by TheShadowOverYourBed. My college is next to a small cemetery that connects up to an old abandoned road. The cemetery is towards the back of the school, by the sports fields, and it's surrounded by a pretty dense forest. Well, it's pretty dense for a forest in Texas. The trees are sturdy and shortish, scraggled and twisted, with tall yellowing grasses and the sudden color of wildflowers in the spring. Growing up around here, I think that it looks gorgeous in the tough, wild sort of way. It's just the way I like it. My point is, it's really nice out there, and it's a great place to go hiking or bike riding as long as you don't get caught on private property. The cemetery itself is also quite nice. It's always quiet and peaceful. It's a tad ominous, but I've always been a little skeptical about ghosts and the afterlife. Like, I don't believe that ghosts are alive. They're more like echoes of the past. Well, I suppose I should say that I used to believe that. Since the trail is so close to campus, especially if you cut through the cemetery, I walk around there a lot. The other week, I decided that since the rain had cleared and it wasn't too hot out, I thought that it would be a good day to take my bike on some laps around the school. I had done 3 or 4 laps, but I was getting a little bored with the scenery, so I took my bike down by the tennis and soccer field to cut into the cemetery. The air was cool and the sun was casting warm rays on my face as I carefully rode down the hill. The sky was gorgeous too, a bright blue with streaks of yellows, orange, purples, pinks, and even a little green as the sun started to set. I smiled, fumbling with my Bluetooth headphones with one hand as I switched to an upbeat but relaxing song. As I slowed down, I entered the graveyard. The path is all gravel, so I felt that it would be safer to go a little slower. Also, I had to make some tight turns so that I wouldn't ride over any graves. Despite being skeptical about a lot of things, I'm slightly superstitious. Like, I don't believe in curses, but I won't risk breaking a mirror on accounts of not wanting to bring 7 years of bad luck upon myself. I know, it's stupid, but that's just the way I am, which is exactly why I didn't want to ride over any of the graves. First, it's disrespectful, and it might bring bad luck. Anyway, I was going to turn off onto the abandoned road. But because of the sun starting to set, I decided that it would be safer to ride around the cemetery instead. After all, it was almost just as pretty. But that choice was a mistake. I had done 2 laps admiring the moss and worn stone on the oldest tombstones, reading the names of those who had passed and just kind of getting lost in my thoughts. A sudden cold breeze blew against my skin, and that ominous feeling I always felt when in the cemetery grew. I slowed down and I stopped the bike. I took off my headset and began glancing around. It was spookily quiet. I checked the time on my phone, which said it was around 5:50-ish. I only had a few more minutes of good light, so I decided that it was time to head back. I started pedaling again and got ready to turn my bike around to go off into the neighborhood that I could use to get back to the side of campus where my dorm is, since I lived near the opposite side of the campus to where the fields are. I misjudged my turn though, and I ran over the corner of one of the graves. I grumbled slightly to myself, annoyed. Hopefully, I didn't annoy any of the dead, I thought humorously to myself. Almost immediately as I thought that, my bike suddenly lurched up from beneath me. I yelled as I crashed hard on the ground, my bike landing on top of me. I spun around to see why I had crashed, but there was nothing. Now, before you suggest it, no, I didn't slip. The gravel was dry and packed down, and I was going slow enough that I shouldn't have slipped. Also, the bike kicked up, like it had hit a ditch or something. It didn't skid or slip or whatever. My leg was bleeding pretty bad. A piece of glass had sliced my leg open when I fell. Groaning and shaking a little, I pulled up my bike. It was scratched up and the light reflector thing was broken. But besides that, it was fine. I started to mount my bike again to ride home. But I felt that chill again. I was about to ignore it when I swear to God I heard a scream. It was distant, carried on the wind. It was unearthly. My leg hurts too much anyways. I'll just walk back, I said out loud. No one was there, but I just kind of instantly said it. Maybe it was a good thing that I did. I walked my bike back to the entrance, and as I left, I cast a glance over my shoulder. And I swear I saw a figure out there by the grave that I had crashed by. But when I looked back, it wasn't there. There wasn't anything there. I haven't gone back to the cemetery since then. Now maybe I'm just being too superstitious and paranoid, but something in the back of my mind is telling me that I annoyed someone or something when I rode my bike there for fun. I guess that it felt like I was being disrespectful. So, my advice is this: don't ride your bike in the cemetery. You don't know who or what you might offend. Shadows by SinisterMrVanVlair. I was scared of the dark as a child. It's a common enough fear. Many children share it. The difference is I was scared not of the darkness and of being unable to see in it. It was the things that I could see in the dark that scared me. As a young child, I slept on a loveseat in the family room of my home. My mother, Sandy, despite having a room of her own, slept on the couch next to my loveseat. A small table connected them in the shape of a reversed letter L. My loveseat faced the direction of the TV, which was up against the same wall as our house's fireplace. But there often would not be a fire, and for my first few years, the TV would be turned off at night. The room would be plunged into pure darkness. And in my mother's sweet memory, I say, God, did I hate it. I was a very frightened child, often scared of boogeymen and nightmares, like the ones about a demonic fiend who resembled Zorak from Space Ghost, and him hiding in my fridge, among some other dreams. Many a night I woke from a nightmare and began to see sinister shapes in the shadows against the wall with the fireplace staring at me. Most of these creatures have faded from my memory, but one sticks out in my mind. It was the figure of a cartoonishly tall and thin man with no distinct features, other than what appeared to be a cowboy hat on its head. As time went on, life began to seem scarier than some of my nightmares. Shortly before my 8th birthday, my great-grandmother, who I and my sister Erin called Old Grandma, passed away in her sleep. A few months later, my mother died of breast cancer. After that, my temper grew worse and my thoughts grew darker. I watched horror movies religiously, studying them and using what I learned to terrify my classmates and neighbors. By the time I had reached high school, my temper and behavior were in better check, though my mouth still often got me into trouble at school. I remember watching a horror movie that featured a character called the Shadow Man, and, curious as if he was based on a real legend, I Googled him and came across something called shadow people. One thing that caught my attention was that they are often described as wearing a hat. I immediately had a flashback to my strange encounter with that strange shadow as a small boy, and I had to wonder, was it really just my imagination? It's been several years since then. I still love to scare people, and most of the time I have no problem going for long walks in the dead of night, with the trees in my area blocking most of the sky and some areas of the road and sidewalks. I sleep in a completely dark room, and I hate if the lights come on while I'm trying to sleep. Though I'm more insecure about the grave than ghosts these days, I still wonder about that strange evening. My mother told me that before she and I moved into the house with the rest of our family, that the spirits of a little boy and girl haunted the house, and if a man entered the house, they would either slam doors or be heard running up and down the stairs to the upstairs. My uncle scoffs at the story and refuses to believe it. But sometimes, I wonder.